This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, Sanctuary, OffSites, and the Day After. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode number 75 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality crime-related fiction. This week, I'm answering your questions about suspects seeking sanctuary in a church, off-site offices, and what a homicide scene looks like the day after the police leave. But first, I need to thank Gold Shield patrons Deborah Dunbar from DeborahDunbar.com, CC Jameson from CCJameson.com, Larry Keaton, Vicky Tharp of VickyTharp.com, Chris Ann, Larry Darter, Natalie Borelli of NatalieBorelli.com, and Craig Kingsman of CraigKingsman.com for their support. I also want to send a huge thank you to my Coffee Club patrons. You can find links to all of the writers supporting this episode in the show notes at writersdetective.com/75. And I've had a few patrons ask about upping their Coffee Club pledge to a $10 a month level. So this week, I will be introducing the Silver Cufflink patronage tier at $10 per month. I'm not sure what perks are going to be included with that yet, but I want to thank you for your interest. And to learn about setting up your own Patreon account for your author business or to support the show for as little as $2 per month, visit writersdetective.com/Patreon. Patreon. As I record this on Saturday, January 18th, 2020, it's the first day of Sgt Patrick O'Donnell's retirement from the police force in the state of Wisconsin. I'm not going to name the department, Patrick, but you may know Patrick as the author of Cops and Writers and the admin of the Facebook group under the same name. So if you don't know him yet, be sure to check out his book, Cops and Writers, From the Academy to the Street. Patrick has quickly become a great friend, and I just want to take a moment and say congratulations on retirement, buddy. You really deserve it. When a law enforcement officer has an arrest warrant for a person, they're allowed to enter that person's home during daylight hours to arrest the person. And when they do that, they do not need a separate search warrant to enter the home to serve that arrest warrant. Generally, any contraband that they find in plain view is seizable because the officers had a legal right to be in the home. And since the officers do not have a search warrant, they can't go looking for additional evidence. They can, however, use whatever is in plain view to develop probable cause to obtain a search warrant. So if I have an arrest warrant for Joe and I go into Joe's apartment and I find a pile of cocaine on the coffee table with a digital scale and a box of those tiny little Ziploc baggies, I can seize those items. And more importantly, I can write a search warrant based upon that evidence and my training and experience that those items are indicative of drug sales going on in that location. So it's only once I get that search warrant signed that I can start looking in drawers and all the other nooks and crannies of the apartment, but not before. Okay, so let's go back to Joe and the arrest warrant with no search warrant. I go to Joe's home to serve the arrest warrant, but he's not there. Lo and behold, I see Joe in his next door neighbor's apartment. Through the window or something. And let's say this apartment belongs to Mike. Am I allowed to go into Mike's apartment to arrest Joe? I could, of course, knock on the door and ask Mike for consent to come into his apartment, but Mike and Joe are friends, and Mike doesn't answer the door, or he looks through the peephole and says, "You can't come in." Am I allowed to go into Mike's apartment to arrest Joe? Now, 5 minutes ago, I legally went into Joe's apartment, literally one door over, without a search warrant to arrest Joe. Well, the simple answer is no, not yet, because Mike's Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure is what's at play here. Sure, I can try to convince Mike with the whole harboring a wanted person thing or get consent that way, but from a legal standpoint, I do not have the authority to just go into Mike's apartment to arrest Joe, even though Joe has an arrest warrant or a warrant out for his arrest. So let's say that Mike isn't even home. Joe's allowed to be in Mike's apartment, like he's feeding Mike's cat or something, right? So how can I legally go into Mike's apartment to arrest Joe for Joe's outstanding arrest warrant? Allow me to introduce you to the Stegall warrant, Stegall GALD. The U.S. Supreme Court decision in Stigald versus United States holds that the Fourth Amendment prevents all warrantless searches of homes of third parties unless there are clear exigent circumstances. So a Stigald warrant is essentially a search warrant for a third-party location where the thing you're searching for is the wanted person. Which brings me to a question that was raised in the Facebook group this week about a suspect seeking sanctuary at a church. While this was certainly common in medieval times when the church and state were the same thing, the United States was founded with a separation of church and state concept. So as a result, United States law has never legally observed religious sanctuary, meaning that the person seeking sanctuary is protected from prosecution by the power of the church. There have certainly been instances where the police did not barge into a church and arrest a person seeking sanctuary in that church, but it's not because of some sort of legal recognition of church sanctuary as being a legally binding thing. Which brings us back to the Stigald warrant. Let's say Joe isn't in Mike's apartment, but rather he's inside his local church and he asks Pastor Mike for sanctuary. From a legal standpoint, it's really no different than the apartment scenario. If I know that Joe is in the church, I can obtain a Stigald warrant from a judge authorizing me to go into the church to arrest Joe for Joe's outstanding warrant. There's really only one place where a fugitive can truly seek sanctuary, and that's in seeking asylum in the embassy or mission of another country, like we've seen in the Julian Assange case. But the key for this sanctuary, or more accurately, its asylum scenario, is that the embassy or the mission accepts the claim of asylum from that person. So the reason that this is a thing is because the embassy or mission are considered the soil of the home nation, not the host nation. So if you walk into the French embassy in Los Angeles, California, you are, from a legal standpoint, in France. French law applies, not United States or California law. Or in Julian Assange's case, he was inside an Ecuadorian embassy in London, England for 7 years. So in Assange's case, Ecuador gave him Ecuadorian citizenship in 2018 because of his seeking asylum under political persecution beliefs. But then Ecuador ended up suspending it in 2019, along with withdrawing his asylum status. So the ambassador of Ecuador to the UK invited the Metropolitan Police in London to enter the embassy, and then they ultimately arrested Assange. So if you're writing a US-based story that requires a character to seek sanctuary somewhere, just know that seeking asylum in a foreign country's embassy or mission is about your only realistic option. Your protagonist has just been promoted or transferred to the narcotics unit, or Vice, or some other surveillance or undercover type unit. They've ditched their G-Shock watch and their white crew-collared undershirt and tried to dirty up so they don't look like they just came off of patrol. He shaves his head and starts on a weekend's worth of a goatee growth, or she lets her hair down and wears a hoodie and jeans to work. But where is that? Where do they show up for work? Is it like the movie Training Day, where they meet at a coffee shop and then work from their UC ride the rest of the day? Or do they report to the police station like normal and hope that none of the bad guys in the lobby or in the interview room see them? Or worse, that some unknown crew is doing surveillance on the station to see who's coming and going and which cars they drive? So where do they show up for work? If you were the chief of police, what would you do to solve this problem? Most agencies of a decent size will have an off-site office to house these specialty units to keep them away from the prying eyes of the public. You ever notice that Crockett and Tubbs were only ever in an office with other undercover detectives in Miami Vice? You never saw uniforms and suspects as extras because they were in an off-site. I'm pretty sure dopers would notice a Daytona Spider and later on a white Ferrari Testarossa parked at police headquarters, right? So, where are these locations in real life? Rather than divulge any more secrets than I already have, you as the author get to have the fun of conjuring up where you could house your specialty unit's secret location. The detectives assigned to these units recognize the importance of keeping these off-site locations secret, so only the cops working there get to go there. We don't want uniforms walking in the front door. No informants, no witnesses, and definitely no suspects ever learn the locations, or much less step inside of off-site offices. Any of that kind of contact is done in the field or back at the main station that the public knows about. The specialty units that work in these offices usually do a lot of surveillance, and as a result, they're great at counter surveillance, detecting when they are under surveillance. So we never just drove from the main station back to our off-site office. We always cleaned ourselves off first with a little counter surveillance run through a neighborhood or two, just to make sure no one was tailing us back to our office. So, Chief, I'd ask you to describe where you're going to place an off-site in your next story, but that's probably a secret we shouldn't be sharing in the first place. Cameron Lowe of RankinFlatsObserver.com asked, I have a character returning to the scene of a double homicide a day later. What would the crime scene look like that removed from the murder? Would there be police tape, etc.? This would have taken place in an apartment hallway and within one of the residences. Thanks very much. Well, Cameron, the police and coroner or medical examiner would have taken everything they thought was pertinent to what happened as evidence. So actual cleanup is handled by professional cleaning services that specialize in crime scene cleanup and restoration, and that would have been paid for by the owner of the property. So in this scenario, most likely the apartment complex or the owner of the apartment complex. Most of the big national cleaning services have specialized units within their company to handle these kinds of scenes, and they're usually retirees from CSI units or the coroner or ME's office that work for these companies, and it's definitely a lucrative business. But a day later, we can expect that the cleaning and restoration crew has yet to arrive. So I'd expect the hallway and apartment carpets to have been cut away wherever there might have been blood and fiber evidence. And then the same thing for drywall that has evidentiary value, such as blood spatter or bullet holes. Whether they actually take these things in real life is really up to the investigators. So in this case, it's really up to you as the creator of this story. But it can make for a pretty compelling scene description if your character returns to find 4 feet of carpeting missing from the hallway. There likely would not be any crime scene tape left at the scene, as it's no longer an active crime scene once the police leave. But if you want the visual of it, your character might find the knot of yellow tape where it was originally secured to a railing or fixture, but rather than untie the knot, the cops just simply ripped it away from the railing, leaving that little bit of the knot behind and then taking the rest of the tape with them. In rare cases, the ME or coroner may use an official tamper-proof sticker to seal the door jamb for that apartment, and where the tearing the sticker would indicate that somebody went inside. But again, once they give up the crime scene, there's no need for the seal on the door, so they probably would not have placed one there in the first place. The seals, at least in my experience, are more often used on things like car doors and trunk lids, where a car is being transported by a tow truck to a secondary location for additional forensic testing. But again, placing that sticker has the potential to disturb evidence that might be underneath it. So we are much more likely to have a police officer or detective follow the tow truck, maintaining visual on the custody and being able to attest that nobody tampered with that scene. So anyway, the only reason I mentioned the sticker or those sticker seals is because they exist and they might make for a neat visual if used correctly. Now, what else? There might be leftover fingerprint powder on surfaces that had been dusted for latent prints, and then you might also be able to see the outlines of the tape that was used to collect those prints. So when you dust for fingerprints, you're using it's usually like a graphite type of powder, and then once those prints are noticed, once you see them, you lift them using clear tape. It almost looks like packing tape you would use to seal up a box. So the outline of that tape is probably something you might see as well. And that's more likely to be seen inside the apartment, as the hallway could have dozens of prints left by people that had nothing to do with that double murder. All in all, though, it would still pretty much look just as the police found it, just missing whatever items were seized as evidence. Thank you so much for listening this week. This show is powered by your questions, so send them to me by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week and write well.